feel like there aren't that many good storyboarding on Photoshop tutorials, so this is, I mean, if anything, this is just how I do it, but if there's a better way, let me know. Assuming you know how to use Photoshop, actually, no, I take that back. You don't even have to know Photoshop to do this tutorial, I think. To start off, we gotta talk about layer comps. What you see on screen right now is just the workspace that I use. But if you're starting off, you probably don't see layer comps right off the bat. So if you want to find it, you probably just have to go to Window and then find layer comps. Basically, to understand layer comps, you have a bunch of layers, and layer comps determine which layers are visible, like saved snapshots of your Photoshop file. Basically, think of your Photoshop file as a sandwich. The layers are all the ingredients, and the layer comps are the different ways to assemble these ingredients into different sandwiches. I don't know if that analogy actually helps. To add a layer comp, just click the little plus button over here, and you're going to have this window pop up. You just click OK, and boom, you got a layer comp. And so when I add another layer or whatnot, it'll sort of save the fact that I have these layers. And when you make any changes, just click this little refresh button. Otherwise, the layer comp won't register the changes you made to your layers. The little newspaper icon on the left will sort of indicate whether or not the layer comp is saved to the way that it appears on screen. To move back and forth between your layer comps, you just sort of use these little arrows. I would recommend setting shortcuts just to make the process a little faster. If you run into an issue, like say you delete this layer, you're going to have these little panic icons over here. And that's just basically Photoshop going, To save yourself, just click this little refresh button on each of the layers and sort of just calm Photoshop down to assure them that everything's going to be okay. Now there are three aspects to a layer comp. There's the visibility, the transformation, and the effects. Visibility is the visibility of the layer, whether or not it's seeable or unseeable. Transformation is where the layer is on the canvas. Note that scale is not one of these transformations that it will keep because it's pixel based and it won't remember. Effects affect the opacity or the blending mode of the layer. So if it's a multiply layer, if it's 50% opacity, that way you can change the opacity or the blending mode depending on which layer comp it's on. So to activate any of these, you can click one of these buttons, one of these buttons, or one of these buttons. And that'll just determine whether the layer comp will actually remember these aspects of your layers. Organization. Let's take a look at an example. This is one of the boards that I'm working on. When it comes to organization, I personally like to separate my layers into two categories: foreground, background, and I guess sometimes shading. This method of organization allows me to reuse backgrounds for different boards. So that way I don't have to copy and paste or, God forbid, redraw all the backgrounds in my storyboard. I know that some people like to organize their folders so that each folder is a board, and within each folder is like a foreground, a background, and maybe like a midground or lighting and stuff like that. That way you can really customize how many layers are in each image. But personally, this is just the way that works more for me, so it's up to you. Finally, we're going to talk about actions. Actions can be really daunting at first, but they're actually really simple. And by the way, these are optional for storyboarding. It's just that they'll definitely come in handy for making your job a whole lot easier. Basically, actions are like layer comps for doing stuff. It's like making your own buttons for Photoshop. Photoshop starts with these default ones, but you can ignore those. I've never used them. To start, you just click this plus sign, and you give it a name, like blur example, and you click record. So from now on, anything you do will be recorded into this action. So if I wanted to make an action for motion blur, or just blurring in general, I'll go to filter, I'll go to blur gallery, and then I'll go to path blur. And this will give this wacky one. So say I want like one that goes kind of diagonal across the screen, like a diagonal blur. I can kind of adjust the speed of it, of which I want it. I think maybe around 25 should do the trick, and then I'll click OK. And when I'm done editing my action, I can click the stop. And you can sort of record and stop whenever, just to add on to an action whenever you want to. But if I want to, say, apply this action again, so if I want to go to a specific layer and I want to apply it, I click on the action that I want, and I click play. And then it'll apply whatever I put in that action onto the layer. The only weird thing about actions is that they are still just a bunch of stuff you're doing. So if you have an action with like 12 steps and you want to undo it, you have to undo 12 times. So that's annoying. Now, the blurs and brightness parts are the only actions that I made for myself. The rest of these that you see are actually made by Toniko Pantoja, bless that man. I bought these actions from him because they're really helpful. I use them all the time. They have these really great functions like auto-filling your line work and doing some really cool lighting stuff and just all of these really cool things. So I would highly recommend checking his video on these actions, as well as potentially buying them for yourself. I'll put the link in the description below. But yeah, I think that covers everything that you really need to know with Photoshop and how to storyboard on them. If there are any other aspects of Photoshop that I haven't covered that would help with storyboarding, let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if there are any other tutorials you want me to cover, like Blender, or Adobe Animate, or Premiere Pro. I don't know. Do you have any? Bye.